And last week I've been speaking about how, staying engaged with the complexity and the messiness of what's happening in our world and in our daily lives is our practice. Because staying engaged is the only way how the path becomes discernible. Because if we don't engage, if we withdraw from all of this because it's overwhelming, our path will not be visible and we're gonna just stagnate more or less. And doing that, with a lot of wisdom and compassion, to not overdo it, but to kind of stay with the stretch of what's required to stay engaged. And I've heard yesterday, that about 5 million people have been showing up to those No Kings event. And, Jennifer and I, together with a friend, we were also going to one here in San Rafael on a crossroads. It was a small event, but it was very lively, and there were lots of honking, of the cars which drove by, and people were waving and showing us thumbs up and having little signs which they were holding out of the car windows. And a few were also thumbs down, but I counted only 4 actually. So that was really, really inspiring to be in that energy and to see the creativity of the people. Some had really just like little tiny signs, and I remember one man, he had a heart, really not big, a heart on a little stick, and he was just going around with that, holding it up like that. It was so kind of really sweet, the creativity and the different personalities, how they would express themselves in that. Seeing the goodness of people and feeling that goodness really also, in one's own heart. The goodness of what we do to stay engaged with what's happening and share our love, for the process, which is so mysterious and so unfathomable with the intellect. And, going to such events is, I think, most of all, an opportunity, to have that goodness reflected back by meeting others who are attending as well. And there is a kind of, it's an empowerment, where we can feel our own goodness in communion with others, doing, what they can in the situation. So that was really nourishing because of that. So, if you hear that, I wonder, if you feel some kind of resonance in your heart also. Maybe, quite a few of you have been also to those events, and I wonder if you had the same experience or a similar experience. So now if we can put our hand on our heart and just, breathing in that resonance. The intuitive recognition of, wanting to align ourselves with this aliveness, which is meeting us at a time when there is great changes underway. And then breathing that in, tasting that goodness, and with the out breath, relaxing into the spaciousness. And sensing into the mystery and the fact that we are part of this great transformation with all its awesomeness and great uncertainties. And we are all, we are all together in this. And our little group here being a pocket of sanity in the midst of many others of such pockets. And how beautiful that is. To be able to connect with that. It's like this mycelium, going all around the planet, and we can connect into it. And receive that nourishment. And then we see how we express it, in our individual ways. As these new insights and understandings are emerging into collective consciousness. Through the planet, through the food we eat, the water we drink, the air we breathe, we communicate with the planet every moment. And the planet communicates with the stars, with the cosmos, this awesome orchestra. We are part of a very, very tiny, tiny part, but we are in it. And we can consciously, remember this. At a time, when our species is beginning to realize the devastating impact we can have, not only on ourselves and our own species, but on so many other species. And even, on the delicate balance of the planet itself. Becoming aware of that now more and more is a big thing to integrate. Because, inside of modernity, we are always operating with the environment as something to conquer and control, because it is somehow considered dangerous or something. And now we are waking up to the fact what has happened. Out of that view, a lot of damage has been created. And we can wake up to that with acceptance, or just stay in aversion and fear and defense. And fear might be quite an appropriate response, but it needs to also be embraced, not getting lost in that, but accepting that too. Modernity is about fear of uncertainty. And we can learn, to choose a more wholesome response, a more growthful response. And we can cultivate that. I recently have listened to an interview with a Peruvian ceremonial leader called Akan Lushwala, And he was asked, what does it mean to be indigenous? And he said he heard a colleague of his saying that being indigenous simply means being grateful. Being grateful, for all of life which is supporting us. And there was such a simple answer, but it resonated really deeply with me. And really brought it home to me again, how deeply modernity is steeped in the exact opposite of that. Modernity is not about gratefulness. It's about how, can we get more. And now we are waking up to that, how devastating that actually is, that stance, to live from that place is like really, it's really not sustainable. This, restless search for more, which has led to the fact that by 1914, the beginning of the First World War, 84% of the planet had been colonized by Europeans or by European descendants. 84% of the planet. This is really quite something to allow that to sink in.
Oh dear.
And we also know, that of the remaining biodiversity on the planet, 80% of that remaining biodiversity is stewarded by indigenous nations around the world. And these indigenous nations around the world make up 6% of the population. So that's really significant. 84% of the planet have been colonized, and 6% of the world population, that's the indigenous nations, take care of 80% of the biodiversity. That should tell us something really significant. And it does. So there's a lot for us to learn here. And also, how the conditioning that we have inherited through our upbringing, through our education, colonizes our own unconscious. And in that way, kind of quote unquote constipates our imagination for how we could live. And here we can really deeply, learn from our indigenous brothers and sisters who have been able to protect some or a lot of those teachings and this information. Whereas, our own indigenous forebears are in the distant past and we have more or less lost connection. But we can retrieve that connection through the help of our indigenous brothers and sisters. And also what is still remembered, from our own indigenous forebears. And, for most of us white people, our indigenous forebears have been persecuted in the witch hunts and the Inquisition in Europe. And there's been a lot of bloodshed and oppression and killing and torturing and all the rest of it. And this is the people which then came over here, into other places on the ships with all of that baggage, of the trauma of that time, of the Inquisition and the witch hunts and the Black Death and all of those things. And then that trauma, was basically downloaded through the colonizing process. And now we are waking up to this. And taking the time to allow it to land in us. And allowing the natural intelligence of the process to get unstuck from that, which colonizes our own minds as well. And it takes care and a lot of acceptance, love, and gentleness, to work with the constipation, the constipation which we didn't really know that we are inflicting onto ourselves through the process. So just opening to it is opening to it collectively, because we can't do this work alone. It's a collective constipation, we can say. We have to do it together. And that's what we are doing here on the Wednesdays. Taking it as an earthworm job to work with this density, with the darkness, and doing it no matter how long it takes, doing it for future generations, because we might never see much of the change. But we can be part of being it. As this information emerges into consciousness for us, for us white people. Or people who have, been conditioned in the Western Hemisphere. So bringing together these two streams, the stream of the Buddhist teaching and the stream of the teachings of our indigenous brothers and sisters and the teachings of the earth herself. And that, helps us to open up to what wants to emerge into consciousness now, into collective consciousness. So allowing the breath to take us into the body and really sensing into what's going on there. As we are hearing this, as we are allowing this to sink in, and making space for that. Not going into guilt, not going into beating ourselves up, but just making space for it to land, like snow, or rain. Just allowing it to go through the body and wash away the resistance, the aversion, and trusting the process. And sensing the gravity which gently pulls us towards the earth, the foundation for these bodies, which keeps us alive through providing food and drink and oxygen. All of this, being produced and being powered by the sun. This is an awesome process. Photosynthesis and production of oxygen through plankton and plants. This is the basis of our life, the basis of these bodies. And the vastness of that. As we are starting, to participate more intuitively rather than trying to cut it all up in small pieces through science. And kind of losing touch with the beauty and the awesomeness of this vast intelligence which keeps us alive and gives us instructions if we are ready to turn towards rather than distracting ourselves. And the intensity of that and of meeting the vastness. And allowing ourselves to be drawn into accountability by sensing into the rightness of all of it. In modernity, we are usually conditioned, to look into the future, what's going to come next. Where do we go next? Where can we get something next? And how quickly can we be there? And that has been, had a very impoverishing effect on our capacity to take in what is really already here. Because we're getting too focused, too one-pointed onto the future. And forgetting everything else becomes a struggle to get somewhere. And now there's no more places to go. 84% already have been colonized of the planet. We need to make it work where we are. And in that way, indigenous people have a lot more resilience and wisdom because they had to make it work since many, many years, being overpowered and dispossessed and forced in so many ways. And still they are here. Because they have held on to those teachings. Which, we have lost touch with. And even, the Buddha's teaching or some parts of it, have been hijacked and used for being more successful consumer. All of the mindfulness movements, some of those, they have been quite superficial, not the whole package, which is the Noble Eightfold Path, but just using one element, just using mindfulness. And before I mentioned Arcangel Ushigua, the Peruvian ceremonial leader, who is the spiritual advisor of the Pachamama Alliance. And in this interview I recently heard, he also mentioned that in his culture, Quechua speaking people living in the highlands in Peru, when they speak about, going into the future, they are actually having their back towards the future. And in front of them is the past. And everything, which has already been given. All of the work the ancestors have been giving, all of what the biosphere is giving, the forests and the fields and the rivers and the mountains. So all of that is in view and is remembered. And then from that sense of grounding and enrichment, there's a walking backwards into the future. Not a desperate grasping for something which isn't here, but it's a measured walking from a sense of groundedness and connection. And when I heard that, it was something I've never ever even a minute thought about. And this is an indigenous way of looking. So, to consciously try on new ways of looking. Because what we see will be different depending on how we look and where we look from. So trying that on, maybe, to go with your back towards the future, slowly, carefully, and being aware of everything which is already here, which supports us. The food, drink, oxygen, everything we have, being able to come here to this session, having the time, having the means. We have so much going for us already. And really making a conscious effort to take that in. Then naturally, gratitude is the response of the heart. if we look in a different way. And this is what is asked of us now, to learn this different way of looking, a way which is sustainable and more based in reality, how it really is. Because in this way, taking in what's really happening, we can allow life in and around us to guide us. And there is definitely things, which need to be figured out with the head, but the basic foundation of our being being alive right now, that cannot be figured out with the head, but it needs to be sensed, with the heart. And by, for example, turning it around and having the future in our backs, not, grasping towards the future, but in this much more relaxed manner. That can really help, to activate this connection again, which indigenous people have managed to keep alive. To get an interest in what is happening inside of us, what is moving inside of us, this aliveness. That vibrancy. Which comes into us through eating, drinking, and breathing. And then consciously sensing into that aliveness. Which is containing information. Literally, being part of the formation of these bodies, arising into the formation as information. And, sensitizing ourselves towards that. What is life looking for in us? In this moment, and really feel and sense that and allow ourselves to be guided by it. Not by thinking about it, but by sensing into it. And if, a sense of doubt comes up or discomfort, anxiety, just embracing that as well. It's part of the process. This is how the constipation loosens up. And trusting the life which is inside of our bodies. That it knows what to do. And how to, quote unquote, use our individual skills and strengths, talents and gifts and medicines we have to give. In these times, two things are happening. Something is dying, and at the same time, something new is being born. And the way of looking is widening and deepening. And that which we experience as a crisis, the news is full with those things, is also an opportunity for change. Things need to fall apart before they can reconstellate. So the change is already underway, and we can tune into that and begin to embody it in whatever way we feel called to do that. And it's not us making this change, but these changes are happening to the earth herself, to the whole planet. And it communicates through eating, drinking, breathing, and also in the way we attune to this aliveness. Because the change is happening regardless if we attune to it or not. But if we are tuning to it and participating, the pressure we experience gets released, and there's more of a sense of being part of something much bigger than ourselves. Whereas if we, try to keep it all in the box, building more walls and keeping the pressure out, it can't really, this is not working. It just drags it out a little bit, and then it's going to be even more painful than it needs to be. So there's this possibility of us attuning and being part of the change through embodying it in our different ways as we are transformed ourselves. And of course it brings up fear and doubt, but not getting stuck in that, then really using the Buddha's teaching to work with it. We know what to do. We need to embrace it and make it part of what is being known. Oh, doubt has arisen, anxiety has arisen, and then taking care of ourselves as good as we can to allow it to move through. This is the work. And it needs to be a collective work. Nobody can do it alone, and everybody gets a different piece, of the instructions. It's like a huge puzzle. And what we need to do is only to not get lost in the head and trying to figure it out like that, but receive the instructions with the body, with the heart, with that, which keeps us connected with the earth, these earth bodies, which have emerged out of the earth through the support of our mothers. And when the time comes, they go back into the earth. This is the connection. And that's a connection we have kind of lost, because of overemphasizing the intellect for centuries. And now we are coming back to it because we are understanding it now. We can correct it, we can retrain, recondition. It's totally something we can do. It was simply a mistake, to put the head on top of everything else. But now we know. Before we just didn't. The thinking mind can't be the leader of communication with the universe. It can't be. The earth talks to the body. The body is the organ of listening for this. The head can serve, in order to execute then some of the decisions we make. And the body, really tells us if we are on the right track. We can feel it. We can sense it. And that doesn't mean, that sometimes we might feel very, contracted, fearful, doubtful, and that has an expression in the body. But if we stay with it, it changes again. So going into the stretch zone and then being with the discomfort of that without without breaking. So knowing, how much to take on at a time. Then slowly growing in that way, expanding perception. And picking up, the threads which have been lost and weaving ourselves back into the bigger web of life in this way. For the benefit of future generations most of all, and for our own benefit. Even we might never see much of the change anymore because simply we are already, living for so long. In the same way, as our forebears have been passing on life to us. And maybe you can sense also, sense the presence of everybody else on the call, how much easier it is, to stay in that field if you're not on our own. This is truly a collective practice. And as we are slowly coming to the end of the session today, I'd like to share with you again Icaro, a medicine song by Manari Ushigua from Ecuador. I've played it a few times already, but I think I can't hear it often enough. And you can, I also played a video, but you can just only listen, that's fine too. Okay, and Kate, if you can give me a thumbs up if you can hear the sound, please.
Yêu na các baya trái mi đi xin nawang minyo chi cao say ca su ma ca pasca chỉ Kambaya trái oan chắc mà kia khâu nô môn đôi đi số ma ta cái mà trái mà ô cô môi re